The email subject line was aggressively bland. Second chance draw notification. Action required. Usually these went straight to my spam folder, another digital siren song luring unsuspecting folks towards a mythical Nigerian prince or a too-good-to-be-true timeshare. But this one, from the official State Lottery Commission, had somehow slipped through. Probably because I had actually entered a few second-chance draws with losing scratch-off tickets over the past year, a mostly mindless habit like tossing a penny into a fountain, expecting nothing. I clicked. My eyes scanned the dense official list. Congratulations, random selection, prize tier B, and then the number jumped out, bolded and stark against the white background, $100,000. My breath hitched. My fingers, hovering over the trackpad of my slightly battered laptop, froze mid-scroll. It had to be a mistake. A very cruel, very elaborate phishing scam. I reread the sentence, then the whole paragraph. I checked the sender's email address. It looked legit. I went to the official lottery website, navigated to the second chance draw results, and typed in the entry number from one of the crumpled tickets I still had stuffed in my wallet. And there it was again, my number. My name, or at least A. Chen, which was close enough to send a jolt through me. Prize amount, $100,000. No, I whispered, the sound barely audible in my quiet little apartment kitchen. No way. My heart started a frantic drum solo against my ribs. I stood up, walked a tight circle around my tiny two-seater table, then sat back down, hands trembling. Liam, my boyfriend of 5 years, wouldn't be home from his teaching gig for another 2 hours. I needed to tell someone to verify this wasn't some stress-induced hallucination. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling, and dialed. Not Liam. Not yet. My first instinct, the one conditioned by nearly 30 years of family dynamics, was to call my mother. But as the phone began to ring, a different thought, cold and sharp, sliced through the dizzying elation. $100,000. After taxes, what would that be? 70, maybe 75,000? Enough to finally wipe out the crushing mountain of student loan debt that had been my constant companion for the last decade. Freedom. The word bloomed in my mind, bright and intoxicating. And with that thought, the image of my parents' faces, their carefully neutral expressions whenever the topic of my student loans arose, superimposed itself over the lottery website. The old, familiar ache tightened my chest, a counterpoint to the wild hope thrumming there. The phone was still ringing. I pressed end call before Mom could answer. The elation was still there, but it was now tangled with something far more complicated. This wasn't just good news. This was a reckoning. My college experience, compared to my younger sister Chloe's, was a masterclass in financial disparity. I remembered the spring of my senior year of high school like it was yesterday. I'd been accepted to the state university, a decent school with a good program for what I wanted to study. Social work, then later project management for nonprofits. I'd also received a modest academic scholarship, but it barely dented the tuition. I'd sat down at the same kitchen table, where I was now staring at a 6-figure mirage. My acceptance letter and financial aid package spread out. "This is great, Mom, Dad," I'd said, trying to keep the nerves out of my voice. "The scholarship helps, but there's still a pretty big gap for tuition. And then there's room and board. I was hoping we could talk about how to cover it." My father, Mark, a man whose pronouncements often carried the weight of biblical edicts in our house, had cleared his throat. "Ava, you're a smart girl. Resourceful. You'll figure it out. Student loans, they build character, teaches you responsibility." He'd smiled, a tight, dismissive little smile that didn't reach his eyes. My mother, Susan, ever the gentle enabler of Dad's decrees, had patted my hand. "We have to be practical, dear. Your major, social work, it's noble, but the earning potential isn't huge right away. You understand. And your sister? Well, Chloe's different. She'll need more support." Chloe, 2 years younger, was already talking about art schools, private liberal arts colleges with eye-watering price tags. Different was code for the golden child, the one whose path would be paved with parental funds, no questions asked. And so it was. While I juggled 2, sometimes 3 part-time jobs, a pre-dawn barista shift that left me smelling of burnt coffee, endless hours shelving books in the university library's dusty basement, tutoring sullen freshmen in statistics, Chloe, 2 years later, waltzed off to a prestigious private university 3 states away. Her tuition, her dorm fees, her meal plan, even a cute little used car for emergencies were all covered by Mom and Dad. They'd cashed in some bonds, Dad had said, taken out a home equity line of credit. It's an investment in her future, Mom had chirped, beaming at Chloe's graduation photos where she posed with her art history degree. My investment in my future involved ramen noodles eaten cold because I was too tired to heat them, meticulously tracking every penny, the constant gnawing anxiety of accumulating debt, and missing out on so many quintessential college experiences because I was always working or too broke to participate. I graduated with honors, a diploma clutched in one hand, and a statement for $58,342.17 in federal and private student loans clutched in the other. Character building indeed. For 10 years, that debt had shadowed my every financial decision. It dictated where I could afford to live, what jobs I could take, whether I could even dream of things like a down payment on a condo or starting a real savings account. I've been chipping away at it diligently, relentlessly, but the interest rates felt designed to keep you underwater forever. Now this, a digital miracle, a clean slate. When Liam finally got home, I practically vibrated with the need to tell him. He found me pacing the tiny living room, phone clutched in my hand. "Whoa, Ava, what's up? You look like you've seen a ghost or won the lottery?" He trailed off, his brow furrowing with concern. I just thrust the phone at him, the lottery website still glowing. He read it, his eyes widening. "Holy, are you serious? 100 grand?" He looked at me, then back at the phone, then at me again, a huge grin spreading across his face. He swept me up in a hug, lifting me off the floor. "Ava, that's incredible. Amazing." "I know," I gasped, laughing and crying at the same time. "After taxes, Liam, it's enough. It's enough to pay them all off. Every last cent." He held me at arm's length, his expression softening with understanding. He knew the whole sordid history, the years of quiet resentment I'd carried. "Wow," he said softly. "That's poetic justice, babe. Seriously." The official notification letter arrived a few days later on thick, watermarked paper. It was real. I made an appointment with a lottery official, filled out a mountain of paperwork, and opted for the lump sum. The actual deposit, after state and federal taxes were withheld, was $68,753.22. It landed in my checking account like a spaceship touching down in a suburban backyard. Alien, unbelievable, and utterly transformative. The following Sunday was our regular family dinner at my parents' house in the suburbs. It was a ritual I sometimes dreaded, the air often thick with unspoken things, with Chloe's casual anecdotes about her latest trendy brunch spot or expensive yoga retreat contrasting sharply with my own more modest lifestyle. But this time, I felt a strange mixture of nervousness and a burgeoning, unfamiliar sense of power. I waited until dessert. Mom's slightly too dry apple pie. Liam was there, a silent pillar of support beside me. So I began clearing my throat, my palms suddenly sweating. I actually have some pretty big news to share. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. Dad paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Mom smiled expectantly. Chloe looked up from scrolling through Instagram on her phone. I recently won a prize from the state lottery, a second chance draw." I took a deep breath. It was for $100,000. The reaction was not what I, in some naive corner of my heart, might have hoped for. There were no gasps of excitement, no exclamations of, "Congratulations, Remy," or "That's fantastic, Ava." Instead, there was silence, a profound, echoing silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. My father's fork clattered loudly onto his plate. My mother's polite smile froze, her eyes wide and blank. Chloe's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up, her mouth forming a silent O of surprise. They just stared, frozen, like mannequins in a department store window. It was Dad who broke the spell after what felt like an eternity. He cleared his throat, a dry, rasping sound. "Oh," he said, his voice flat. "Well, that's certainly something." Mom blinked rapidly, the forced smile returning, but it was brittle, stretched too thin. "How unexpected, dear," she managed, her tone unnaturally high. "Goodness me." Chloe, at least, recovered enough to offer a slightly more enthusiastic, "Whoa, Ava, seriously. 100K, that's wild." But even her surprise seemed muted, quickly overshadowed by the palpable strangeness emanating from our parents. The lack of genuine joy, of simple, unadulterated happiness for me, was a physical blow. It landed in my stomach like a lead weight. It wasn't just surprise, it was something else, something guarded, calculating. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with thoughts I couldn't quite decipher but that made my skin crawl. Liam reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a small, grounding gesture. The rest of the dinner was excruciatingly awkward. The conversation stuttered along, forced and unnatural. My parents asked a few stilted questions. "When did you find out? What are the taxes like on that kind of thing?" But their inquiries felt less like congratulations and more like an interrogation, an assessment. It was as if my sudden windfall was an anomaly they needed to categorize, to understand how it fit into their carefully constructed family narrative, the one where I was the responsible, self-sufficient, slightly struggling older daughter, and Chloe was the one who needed and received their largesse. The freeze at the dinner table eventually thawed, but into something far more unsettling, a period of intense, calculated casualness. In the week that followed, my phone buzzed more often with calls and texts from my parents than it had in the previous 6 months combined. "Ava, dear," Mom's voice would coo over the line, "just calling to see how you are. And I was just thinking, with that money, it's such a big responsibility. Have you given any thought to what you'll do with it all? It would be a shame to see it just disappear." Dad, in his typically gruff manner, offered, "Ava." Mark Chen speaking, "About that lottery business. There are some very good financial advisors out there. Your Uncle Jerry used a fellow, very sharp. You wouldn't want to make any foolish mistakes, squander it on trivialities." Trivialities, I thought, picturing the mountain of student loan statements in my filing cabinet. The irony was almost too much to bear. Chloe's approach was more direct, if equally clueless. "OMG, Ava, congrats again. So crazy jealous, LOL. We should totally go on a massive shopping spree. Or like a spa weekend. My treat next time, I swear." She genuinely seemed to think this windfall meant I was suddenly rolling in disposable income, completely oblivious to the decade of financial burden I'd been shouldering, a burden she'd never had to even consider. I discussed it all with Liam, usually late at night, after fielding another one of their subtly probing calls. It's like they've conveniently developed amnesia about the last 10 years, I said, pacing our small living room. They know I have over $50,000 in student debt. They know it's because they chose not to help me, not in any significant way. The very first thing I thought of when I saw that number was freedom from that debt. And all they can talk about is what I'm going to do with their perceived newfound wealth. The old hurt, the familiar sting of being the less favored child, resurfaced with a vengeance. But this time, it was mixed with a growing suspicion. Their sudden, intense interest felt transactional, It didn't feel like concern for my well-being. It felt like they were circling, waiting. What do they want? The question echoed in my mind. It didn't take long for the hints to start dropping, as subtle as anvils. During one phone call, Mom sighed dramatically. "Oh, this old house. It just seems like one thing after another. Mark was just saying the other day, the roof is probably going to need a complete replacement before next winter, and you know how much that costs." Such a worry. A few days later, Dad cornered me after I'd stopped by to pick up some mail that had mistakenly been sent to their address. "You know, Chloe's little hatchback is really on its last legs," he said, frowning thoughtfully. "She needs something reliable, something safe for her commute to that new job downtown. But those down payments these days, they're killer. She's trying to save, but it's tough for young people starting out." He looked at me pointedly, as if expecting me to offer a solution. They started talking about a big family vacation, something they hadn't done in years. "Maybe a cruise," Mom suggested brightly, "or that resort in Hawaii Chloe was telling us about. We could all finally afford to go. Wouldn't that be lovely?" They conveniently forgot that any previous family splurges, a weekend trip to a nearby city, new ski equipment for Chloe, had rarely included me, as I was usually too busy with work or probably couldn't afford it anyway. The implications were clear, even if unspoken. Now that Ava has money, our family problems can be solved. Now that Ava has money, our family dreams can be realized. My windfall wasn't mine. It was a communal pot they were already mentally divvying up. Ignoring the increasingly unsubtle hints, I took practical steps. I made an appointment with a fee-only financial advisor, a sensible woman named Ms. Albright, whom Liam's colleague had recommended. I laid out my situation: the windfall, my student debt, my modest income, my desire for long-term financial security. Ms. Albright was a breath of fresh air. She didn't talk about squandering or trivialities. She talked about debt elimination strategies, emergency funds, and low-risk investments. Following her advice, I authorized a wire transfer that wiped out my entire remaining student loan balance, $52,871.43. Seeing that zero balance confirmation pop up on my loan servicer's website brought tears to my eyes. It was like a physical weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I hadn't fully realized I was carrying until it was gone. I allocated another $10,000 to a high-yield savings account as an emergency fund. 6 months of living expenses, Miss Albright had advised. The remaining $5,000-odd went into a diversified index fund, a small seed for the future. I felt an immense sense of relief, of adult accomplishment. I had taken a stroke of incredible luck and used it responsibly, securing my own financial footing. The family meeting, as Mom dramatically termed it, was inevitable. She called on a Tuesday evening. "Ava, dear, your father and I were hoping you and Liam could come over for dinner on Saturday. There are some important family matters we'd like to discuss, with everyone present." Her voice was laden with significance. Chloe would be there, of course. The atmosphere at Saturday's dinner was even more charged than the night I'd announced the win. It felt like a courtroom, and I was unknowingly on trial. Small talk was strained, punctuated by long, uncomfortable silences. Chloe kept glancing between me and our parents, an air of nervous expectation about her. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Mom had made Dad's favorite pot roast, a clear sign of a serious occasion. Dad leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, steepling his fingers. "Ava," he began, his voice taking on its familiar, authoritative tone. "Your mother and I and Chloe, we've been doing a lot of thinking about this lottery money." He paused, as if for dramatic effect. "It's a blessing, Ava, a real opportunity, not just for you, but for the whole family." Mom nodded eagerly beside him. "That's right, dear. We see this as a chance for us all to move forward, together." I waited, my stomach twisting into a knot. Liam shot me a quick, wary look. It was Susan, my mother, who laid out their proposal, her voice soft and earnest, dripping with feigned reasonableness. "We were thinking, Ava, that a portion of that money could be used as a family investment, something that would benefit all of us in the long run." "For example," Dad interjected, "my hardware store, as you know, has been facing some tough competition from the big box places. A cash injection of, say, $30,000 could allow me to modernize, expand the inventory, maybe even hire another person. It would secure the business for the future, secure our future." "Or," Mom chimed in smoothly, "we've always talked about how nice it would be to have a slightly bigger house, one with a proper guest suite, maybe a bigger yard. If we had a substantial down payment, perhaps around $50,000, we could finally afford to move. It would be a home for all of us, for holidays, for when you and Liam have children." Her voice trailed off meaningfully. Chloe then piped up, her tone hopeful. "And, well, Mom and Dad were saying, since you got so lucky, Ava, maybe you could help me out a little too, like to kind of level the playing field? My student loans from grad school are pretty rough, and I'm trying to save for a down payment on a condo, but it's impossible on my salary." She conveniently forgot that her undergraduate degree, the far more expensive one, had been entirely funded. Even $10,000 or $15,000 would make such a huge difference for me. They looked at me then, all three of them, their faces a mixture of hope, expectation, and a subtle undercurrent of demand. It was clear they'd rehearsed this, a coordinated offensive. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water. My heart was pounding, but my mind felt strangely clear. The years of resentment, of feeling undervalued, had coalesced into a hard, cold resolve. "I appreciate you all sharing your thoughts and ideas with me," I began, my voice surprisingly calm and steady. Liam's hand found mine under the table again, a silent reassurance. "And I understand that you see this money as a potential solution for various family needs." I paused, meeting each of their expectant gazes. "However," I continued, "I've already made decisions about the winnings and have allocated the funds. As you know, I've carried significant student loan debt for the past 10 years because I didn't receive the same level of financial support for my college education that Chloe did." I saw a flicker of defensiveness in my parents' eyes, but I pressed on. "Therefore, the vast majority of the lottery winnings, after taxes, has gone towards paying off that student loan debt in its entirety." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the final confirmation statement from my loan servicer, clearly showing a zero balance. I unfolded it and placed it gently on the table in front of my father. "As of last Tuesday," I said, "I am completely debt-free for the first time in my adult life." The silence that followed was absolute, more profound, more shocking than the silence after I'd first announced the win. My father stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. My mother's jaw literally dropped, her carefully constructed composure shattering. Chloe looked utterly bewildered, as if I'd started speaking in a foreign language. It was Dad who exploded first. His face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. "Student loans?" he roared, slamming his fist on the table, making the remaining water glasses jump. "That's what you spent it on? Your student loans? That was your responsibility, Ava, your choice to incur that debt. This money. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to do something significant, something for your family." Mom found her voice, shrill and trembling with indignation. "Ava, how could you be so selfish?" Tears welled in her eyes, tears of anger, not sadness. "After everything we've done for you, all the sacrifices we've made, don't you care about us at all? About your father's business, about your sister's future?" Chloe, taking her cue from our parents, chimed in, her voice laced with an uncharacteristic bitterness. "Yeah, Ava, that's pretty cold. I really thought you'd want to help us out, even just a little bit. It's not like you earned that money, You just got lucky." The hypocrisy was breathtaking, the sheer, unadulterated entitlement. They weren't just disappointed, they were outraged that I had dared to use my winnings to rectify a financial imbalance they themselves had created and perpetuated for years. "Selfish," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet now. The adrenaline was pumping, but I felt a strange, almost out-of-body calmness. Let me see if I understand this. It was my responsibility to take on nearly $60,000 in debt to get an education, while Chloe's education, costing well over $150,000, was a family investment. I worked 3 jobs through college, lived on nothing, and have spent 10 years making payments on those loans. Chloe graduated debt-free from undergrad and lived in a university-paid apartment. Now, through sheer luck, I receive a windfall, and my first priority is to free myself from that burden you chose not to help me with. And that makes me selfish? I look directly at Chloe. And you're right, Chloe. I didn't earn the lottery money. It was luck. Just like it was your luck to be born the favored child, the one whose financial path was smoothed at every turn. No questions asked. Chloe flushed, looking away. Mom started to sob openly now, muttering about ingratitude and disrespect. Dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was shaking with rage. "I see," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I see where your loyalties lie, Ava. If you're not willing to help your family when you finally have the means, if you prioritize yourself over everyone else who has supposedly sacrificed for you, then maybe you need to seriously reconsider your place in this family. Maybe we've been mistaken about what family means to you." It wasn't an explicit ultimatum, but the threat hung heavy in the air. Conform. Contribute your winnings to us. Or you're out. Liam stood up then, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. "I think we should go," he said, his voice firm and calm, a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging around us. I nodded, feeling numb but also strangely liberated. "Yes," I said, "I think you're right." We walked out of that house, leaving behind a scene of simmering fury, bitter accusations, and shattered expectations. The drive back to our apartment was mostly silent. The weight of what had just happened, the potential severing of family ties, was enormous. But beneath the shock and the sadness, there was also a burgeoning sense of peace. I had stood up for myself. I had prioritized my own hard-won financial freedom. And I had refused to be guilted or manipulated into fixing problems that were not of my making. Problems born from years of their own choices and their blatant favoritism. The fallout was immediate and severe. For weeks, there was a complete communication blackout from my parents. No calls, no texts. My birthday came and went without so much as a card. Chloe sent a perfunctory HBD text, nothing more. Aunt Carol, Mom's sister, called once, clearly dispatched as a flying monkey to tell me how disappointed everyone was in my selfish behavior and how much I had hurt my parents. I calmly explained my side, pointing out the decade-long financial disparity, but I doubted much of it registered. Supported by Liam, who was unwavering in his belief that I had done the right thing, I focused on my life. I relished the feeling of not having that student loan payment automatically debited from my account each month. I started seriously looking at condo listings with Liam, the possibility of home ownership suddenly feeling real. I poured my energy into my work at the nonprofit, finding solace in making a small, positive difference in the world. The $100,000 hadn't just bought me freedom from debt, it had bought me clarity. It had starkly illuminated the conditional nature of my family's love and support. It had exposed the uncomfortable truth that in their eyes, my value was often tied to my utility, my willingness to conform to their narrative and meet their expectations, especially financial ones. Mourning the family I wished I had was painful, but embracing the reality of my own strength, my own independence, was incredibly empowering. My self-worth was no longer tethered to their approval or their definition of family. Months passed. The silence from my parents remained absolute. The hurt began to dull, replaced by a quiet resignation and, surprisingly, a sense of peace. I was building a life based on my own values, my own choices, free from the long shadow of their favoritism and financial manipulations. The price of that peace had been high, but standing on my own 2 feet, unburdened by debt and their expectations, felt invaluable. Then, about 6 months after the disastrous dinner, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Cautiously, I answered. "Ava, it's Chloe." Her voice was small, hesitant, nothing like her usual confident chirp. Do you have a minute?" A wave of apprehension washed over me. "Chloe? What's wrong?" There was a shaky sigh on the other end. I'm in a bit of a mess, Ava. I had to have an emergency appendectomy last month. My insurance, it turns out it's not great. There's this huge bill, like over $5,000 after they paid their bit, and I don't have it. Mom and Dad are tapped out. Dad's store isn't doing well. I've tried everything." Her voice cracked. "I know I was a total jerk before, about the money. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I was so wrong. I'm so sorry, Ava, for everything." More tears. I was wondering, I hate to even ask this, but could you possibly lend me like $2,000 just to cover the most urgent part? I swear I'll pay you back every cent with interest if you want. I can set up a payment plan. I sank down onto my sofa, stunned. Here it was. Another request for money, albeit wrapped in an apology. But this felt different. There was a raw desperation in her voice, a humility I'd never heard from her before. And for the first time, perhaps, she was facing a genuine financial crisis without the parental safety net she'd always taken for granted. The question hung there, heavy and complicated. My sister, the golden child, was finally experiencing a sliver of the financial anxiety that had been my constant companion for years, and she was coming to me. So I put it to you. What should I do? A, lend Chloe the $2,000 with a clear, written loan agreement outlining repayment terms. See it as an opportunity for her to learn financial responsibility and perhaps a tentative first step towards mending a fractured sibling relationship on new, more equal terms? B, politely but firmly decline. Explain that while I sympathize with her situation, my financial priorities are now firmly focused on my own future with Liam. And after everything that's happened, I'm not in a position to bail her out. Suggest she explore other avenues for assistance, just as I had to do for years. What choice would you make in my shoes?